पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले और काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज का महाज हिंदुस्तान के नाम। पाकिस्तानी फॉरेन मिनिस्टर बिलावल भुट्टो जरदारी ने अपना 2 रोजा यात्रा, हिंदुस्तानी ये लफ्ज इस्तेमाल करते हैं, गोवा में अपना यात्रा मुकम्मल कर लिया है। पास हुए बिलावल, फेल हुए, ए मिला, बी मिला, सी मिला। आज हम उनको रिपोर्ट कार्ड देंगे, उनके इंटरव्यूज, उनकी इंटरेक्शंस, उनके स्टेटमेंट्स, उनके ट्वीट्स का जायजा लेंगे। ये क्यों हुआ, पाकिस्तान का फॉरेन मिनिस्टर 12 साल बाद हिंदुस्तान क्यों गया, इस पे बात करेंगे। आज इस शो के 2 हिस्से हैं। पहला हिस्सा मैं हूं और आप हैं। दूसरे हिस्से में मैं माइकल कुगलमैन, जो साउथ एशिया सेंटर, विल्सन सेंटर, साउथ एशिया इनिशिएटिव जो विल्सन सेंटर का हिस्सा है, वॉशिंगटन का जाना माना थिंक टैंक है, उससे बात करेंगे। मुझे अंग्रेजी में भी बोलने दीजिए। आई विल ऑल्सो बी टॉकिंग टू माइकल कुगलमैन in the show. Of course, Michael is the director of the South Asia Center at the South Asia Initiative. I keep on missing it. At the Wilson Center in Washington. There's 2 parts of the show. The first part is in Urdu. The second part is in English because it's an international issue coming back. हम पिछले 24 से 48 घंटे पूरी जो आप कह सकते हैं पाकिस्तान की फॉरेन पॉलिसी एस्टैब्लिशमेंट का फोकस गोवा में था एससीओ के लिए। एससीओ क्या है? दुनिया की शायद सबसे बड़ी, कहते हैं, वन ऑफ द बिगेस्ट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस इन द वर्ल्ड। 60% यूरेशिया का, ये जो यूरोप और एशिया का ये जो लैंड मास है, 60% की पॉपुलेशन कवर करता है। 40% दुनिया की पॉपुलेशन इस में है। इसके जो मेंबर्स हैं उसमें इंडिया, पाकिस्तान, रशिया और दीगर और ममालिक हैं, मगर ये बड़े मेंबर्स हैं। सेंट्रल एशियन रिपब्लिक्स भी हैं, बहुत सारे मेंबर्स ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं इस साल। ईरान भी ज्वाइन कर रहा है। वेरी इंपॉर्टेंटली 20 से 25% दुनिया की दौलत, दुनिया की जीडीपी इस में रिप्रेजेंट होती है। अब एजेंडा कुछ रियली नहीं था, मगर जो बात बन गई वो ये बन गई कि कौन किससे कैसे मिला। और ऑफ कोर्स पाकिस्तानी फॉरेन मिनिस्टर बिलावल भुट्टो जरदारी अपने रशियन काउंटर पार्ट से मिले बायलैटरली, डिनर्स पे, मल्टीलैटरल समिट्स जो भी हुई, मल्टीलैटरल फंक्शंस हुए, उसमें ये फाइनली जब जयशंकर साहब से मिले, सुब्रमण्यम जयशंकर इंडिया के फॉरेन मिनिस्टर हैं, तो फिर थोड़ी सी उसके बाद, उसके दौरानिए में नहीं मगर उसके बाद तू मैं हुई। अच्छा, तू मैं कैसे हुई? अलग अलग स्टेजेस में हुई। पहले तो बताऊंगा आपको कि जो इंडिया में सबसे बड़ी खबर चल रही है वो बिलावल भुट्टो जरदारी की तड़ी है। यस, उन्होंने तड़ी लगाई इंडिया जाके, दबा के एक तड़ी लगाई जब उनसे सवाल पूछा गया कि आने वाले दिनों में इंडिया कश्मीर में, मकबूजा कश्मीर में G20 की समिट कर रहा है। इससे कश्मीर का जो स्टेटस है, जो इंडिया ने इलीगली उसे एनेक्स किया है, 370 एब्रोगेट किया है, उसे अपना जोरी अपने मुल्क का हिस्सा बना लिया है, क्या आप इसे क्या कहेंगे? तो इस पे बिलावल भुट्टो ने कहा कि हम इसकी मजम्मत करते हैं, मगर वक्त पे ऐसा जवाब देंगे कि उनको याद रहेगा। आज इंडिया में ये सबसे बड़ी हेडलाइन है। अंग्रेजी में उन्होंने कहा कि इट शोज द पैट्रीनेस, इट शोज द एरोगेंस, कि टू हेल्प विद इंटरनेशनल लॉ, टू हेल्प विद यूनाइटेड नेशंस सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल रेजोल्यूशंस, टू हेल्प विद बायलैटरल एग्रीमेंट्स, कि ये इंडिया की जो जोर जबरदस्ती है कि ऐसी की तैसी इंटरनेशनल कवानीन की, ऐसी की तैसी अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा की, ऐसी की तैसी कि हमने पाकिस्तान के साथ क्या एग्रीमेंट्स किए हैं। उन्होंने कहा कि हम इंश्योर करेंगे कि 100% जो G20 में 20 ममालिक हैं, सब मुल्क नहीं आएंगे, क्योंकि दूसरे मुल्क अपने मॉरल्स को कॉम्प्रोमाइज नहीं करेंगे। ये आज इंडिया में सबसे बड़ी ये बात कर गए हैं। इसके अलावा भी काफी सारी बातें की। क्रिकेट पे बात की। जब पूछा किसी सहाफी ने कि क्रिकेट के बारे में क्या ख्याल है, तो सिंपली कहा कि हम समझते हैं कि क्रिकेट को हॉस्टेज नहीं बनाना चाहिए, यरगमाल नहीं बनाना चाहिए, सियासी यरगमाल बना दिया है इंडिया ने क्रिकेट को, और वो हमारे जो ब्लाइंड क्रिकेटर्स हैं उन बेचारों को भी वीजा नहीं देता। हमारे ब्लाइंड क्रिकेटर्स से मैं पूछता हूं इंडिया से क्यों डरते हैं इंडियंस, पाकिस्तानी ब्लाइंड क्रिकेटर्स से? पीटीआई जो मजम्मत कर रहा है उन पे उनकी तनकीद कर रहा है कि उन्हें जाना नहीं चाहिए था। पीटीआई के लिए उनका ये पैगाम था कि मैं इस वक्त पाकिस्तान का फॉरेन मिनिस्टर हूँ। पीटीआई और जो भी बाकी जो लोग मुझे कंडेम कर रहे हैं कि मुझे नहीं आना चाहिए था, अमेरिका जैसे मुल्क में एक रिवायत होती है, जब उनका सदर या जो भी लीडर है कहीं जाता है दूसरे मुल्क में, तो वो अपने जो अंदरूनी मसले हैं उन्हें साइड पे खड़ा कर देते हैं ताकि वो जो टूर है वो सक्सेसफुल हो। भारतीय अवाम का बहुत इंटरेस्ट था इसमें। इससे जब पूछा गया कि भाई एससीओ की मीटिंग पे कम लोगों ने, भारतीय लोगों ने कम इंपॉर्टेंस दी, आपके विजिट को ज्यादा दी, इसमें उन्होंने कहा कि ज्यादातर लोग पाकिस्तान में और हिंदुस्तान में अमन चाहते हैं। अपने जो काउंटर पार्ट हैं, इंडियन काउंटर पार्ट, उनकी होस्टिंग की तारीफ की और कहा कि 2026 में जब पाकिस्तान इंशाल्लाह होस्ट बनेगा तो हमें उम्मीद है कि ये भी हमारे पास आए। इंडियन फॉरेन मिनिस्टर वाज नॉट सो काइंड। इंडियन फॉरेन मिनिस्टर ने वही लाइन इख्तियार की जो करते रहे हैं कि टेररिज्म जो है पाकिस्तान में एक इंडस्ट्री है और ये टेररिज्म को रिप्रेजेंट करते हैं। चलो जी, ये हो गया, ये तो इनकी तू मैमा की बात आई। फिर स्टेटमेंट्स की बात आई। स्टेटमेंट बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट होती है। स्टेटमेंट जो है वो आपका ऑफिशियल जो है मुद्दा होता है। तो ऑफिशियल मुद्दा क्या था, ये अभी जब मैं जो बता रहा था आपको, ये प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस थी। मैं 3 चीजों का जायजा लूंगा। ये बातें मोटी मोटी प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में की बिलावल ने, जो अभी बताई हैं। अब जो बता रहा हूं ये इनका ऑफिशियल मुद्दा था। ऑफिशियल मुद्दे में इन्होंने कहा कि जो एससीओ है पाकिस्तान के लिए बहुत जरूरी है। ये जो दुनिया है कि तुम इधर हम इधर, इस दुनिया में हाइपर पार्टिजान जियो पॉलिटिक्स को खत्म कर देना चाहिए। पाकिस्तान की जो लोकेशन है वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। सीपैक जो है वो एक जबरदस्त किस्म का फोर्स मल्टीप्लायर रीजनल कनेक्टिविटी के लिए बन सकता है। हमारी वैसी तजारत नहीं होती, वैसी कनेक्टिविटी कम है। चाइना जो है वो एक जिंदा मिसाल है। चाइना ने पिछले 10-12 सालों में 800 मिलियन लोगों को गुर्बत से निकाला है। बेनजीर इनकम सपोर्ट प्रोग्राम की उन्होंने जय की। ऑफ कोर्स वन एक्सपेक्ट कर रहा था। गुर्बत को हमने खत्म करना है। पाकिस्तान क्लाइमेट चेंज के लिए बहुत काम कर रहा है। लॉस एंड डैमेज वेवर पे हमने बहुत काम किया, स्पेशली जो पिछले साल जो फ्लड जो है हमारे पास। दहशत गर्दी के बारे में बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात की। कहते हैं कि लेट्स नॉट वेपनाइज टेररिज्म फॉर डिप्लोमेटिक पॉइंट स्कोरिंग। ऑब्वियसली हिंदुस्तान के लिए थी। जब भी कोई काम पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बात करनी होती है तो हिंदुस्तान टेररिज्म का कार्ड प्ले करता है। उन्होंने कहा कार्ड ना प्ले करें। अपनी वालदा शहीद का उन्होंने रेफरेंस दिया कि मैं एक शहीद का बेटा हूं, उसको भी टेररिज्म ने जिसकी जान जाया की। बहुत जो ऑपरेशनल बात थी, जो दूसरी हेडलाइन आज हिंदुस्तान में चल रही है, वो ये उन्होंने की अपने स्टेटमेंट में कि स्टॉप कन्फ्लेटिंग नॉन स्टेट एक्टर्स विद स्टेट एक्टर्स। टेररिज्म के बारे में उन्होंने कहा कि जब एक मुल्क दहशतगर्दी करता है और जब नॉन स्टेट एक्टर्स मतलब दहशतगर्दी करते हैं, इसमें फर्क है। और ये ऑब्वियसली रेफरेंस था खुलबशन यादव के लिए, जो इंडियन नेवी का कमांडर है, काफी सालों से पाकिस्तान की हिरासत में है। और ये मुद्दा इन्होंने जो पेश किया कि दहशतगर्दी हर जगह है, बहुत पुराना इशू है, मगर जब एक मुल्क दहशतगर्दी करता है, अपने नेवी के कमांडर को भेजता है, तो उसमें फर्क होता है बनिस्बत के जो नॉन स्टेट एक्टर्स जाते हैं। और ऑब्वियसली चलते चलते मोदी साहब और खान साहब दोनों को उन्होंने एक ठेंगा दिखाया, बगैर नाम लिए, मगर उन्होंने दिखाया। उन्होंने कहा कि अल्ट्रा नेशनलिज्म, फैशिज्म बन रहा है और ये जो रीजनल जो ममालिक हैं, फैशिज्म, अल्ट्रा नेशनलिज्म, ये हमें थ्रेट कर रहा है। अच्छा, ये इनकी स्टेटमेंट थी। मगर जो शायद देखने वाला इंटरव्यू है वो मैं जरूर आपको कहूंगा कि मेरे व्लॉग के बाद वो जरूर देखिएगा। राजदीप सरदेसाई ने इंटरव्यू किया इनका, वो अंग्रेजी में है, मैं उर्दू में तर्जुमा करता हूं मोटा मोटा। राजदीप सरदेसाई इंडिया टुडे के एडिटर हैं। मैंने उनके साथ काम किया हुआ है, उनके साथ मैंने भी इंटरव्यूज किए हुए हैं। पढ़े लिखे आदमी हैं, बैलेंस जर्नलिस्ट हैं, मगर लाइक वेरी मैनी इंडियंस थोड़ा सा ये हीटेड एक्सचेंज हो गया। उन्हें गुस्सा थोड़ा सा आया। उन्होंने कहा मेरे दोस्त मुंबई अटैक्स में मारे गए थे। बिलावल भुट्टो जरदारी ने काउंटर किया। तो फिर आपसे बेहतर कौन ये अपनी हुकूमत को बता सकता है कि जो मुंबई अटैक्स का जो ट्रायल है वो पाकिस्तान में इसलिए रुका हुआ है क्योंकि आप विटनेसेस नहीं भेजते। खैर, इस इंटरव्यू में जो 20-25 मिनट का इंटरव्यू था, बहुत सारी इंटरेस्टिंग और चीज़ें डिस्कस की गई। पाकिस्तान ने वही अपना मुद्दा रखा कि हम जो आर्टिकल 370 है, जो आपने एग्रीगेट किया है 2019 में, कश्मीर को इलीगली अपना हिस्सा बना लिया है, जब तक आप उस पर पेशरफ्त नहीं करेंगे हम आपसे कोई बात नहीं कर सकते। इस पे वो दूसरी जो साइड है वो बोल पड़ी कि जब तक आप दहशतगर्दी नहीं सही करेंगे, ख़त्म नहीं करेंगे, तो हम आपसे बात नहीं कर सकते। इस पे बिलावल भुट्टो ने कहा हाँ, मगर ये याद रखें कि इस पूरे खत्ते में सबसे ज़्यादा शहादतें दहशतगर्दी में हमने दी हैं। हम सबसे बड़े दहशतगर्दी के विक्टिम हैं। और आप कैसे एक्सप्लेन कर सकते हैं समझौता एक्सप्रेस, लाहौर में टेरर अटैक, और ऑफ कोर्स कुलभूषण यादव के बारे में ज़रा एक्सप्लेन करें ना। बहुत सारा बैक एंड फोर्थ हुआ, काफी एनर्जेटिक किस्म का, इंटरेस्टिंग किस्म का इंटरव्यू है। बिलावल केप्ट his own, बिलावल kept his own, मतलब कि बिलावल ने जो डिबेट की वो मंच के की, और राजदीप सरदेसाई ने भी जो डिबेट की वो इंटरेस्टिंग की. कंक्लूजन ऑफ द मुंबई ट्रायल पे मैंने आपको बता दिया है. हाँ, वुल्फ विस्लिंग, जिसे टेक्निकली डॉग विस्लिंग कहते हैं, एक और इंपॉर्टेंट बात की कि आप लोग हिंदुस्तानियों की बात कर रहा हूं, कि हिंदुस्तानी जब ये जो टेरर का मसला लेते हैं, इसको एक एंटी मुस्लिम, एक एंटी मुसलमान और फिर एक एंटी पाकिस्तान मसला बना देते हैं. ये टेररिज्म है, इसमें इस्लाम को, पाकिस्तान को, इंडियन मुसलमानों को, पाकिस्तानी मुसलमानों को मिक्स ना करें. फिर आखिरी में जो बड़ा मुद्दा था, जो जबरदस्त डिबेट का हिस्सा था, जो जरूर आपने देखना चाहिए आपको, उसमें इन्होंने बोला कि राजदीप सरदेसाई ने बोला कि वो जो यूएनएससी, यूनाइटेड नेशन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल की जो रेजोल्यूशन है अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा की, आप हर वक्त कहते हैं कि वो इंडिया रेजोल्यूशन को नहीं मानता, इंडिया रेजोल्यूशन को रद्द करता है. आप खुद गिलगित बल्तिस्तान से, उसी रेजोल्यूशन में लिखा है कि आप खुद गिलगित बल्तिस्तान से ट्रूप्स भी निकालें ना. तो इस पे आप निकालेंगे कि नहीं निकालेंगे, इस पे इंटरेस्टिंगली एक डिप्लोमेटिक, जो जैसे कहते हैं, एक्सचेंज हुआ, और इस पे इन्होंने कहा, बिलावल भुट्टो ने इंटरेस्टिंगली कहा कि भाईजान, हम पूरी रेजोल्यूशन पे एक्ट करने के लिए तैयार हैं. आप जो हैं वो आधी रेजोल्यूशन पढ़ते हैं कि पाकिस्तान ने क्या करना है, आपने क्या करना है वो आप नहीं पढ़ते. और फिर आखिरी जो था कि आपने कुछ महीनों पहले प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी साहब को गुजरात का कसाई कहा. इस पे बिलावल भुट्टो ज़रदानी ने कहा, एक तो ये मेरे ख्यालात नहीं थे, ये आम इंडियन शहरियों के ख्यालात थे, और दूसरी बात, सियासत में और सिफारतकारी में, पॉलिटिक्स और डिप्लोमेसी में कभी कोई चीज पर्सनली ना कही जाती है, ना उसे ले जाना चाहिए. ये जनाब पिछले 24 से 48 घंटे जो गुजरे हैं, ये बिलावल भुट्टो की कारकर्दगी है. आप उनके जाके देख सकते हैं. अब लोग कहते हैं कि भाई वजाद साहब, आप क्यों बिलावल भुट्टो को अहमियत दे रहे हैं, बिलावल भुट्टो इज नॉट अ वेरी गुड फॉरेन मिनिस्टर, ब्ला ब्ला ब्ला. ठीक है, आप लोगों का, आप सबका मैं कदर करता हूं, आप सबकी राय की, मगर बिलावल भुट्टो हो या अंकल सरगम हो, जो भी है, वो फॉरेन मिनिस्टर हैं, और जब पाकिस्तान का कोई भी नुमाइंदा हिंदुस्तान जाता है तो ये पाकिस्तान के लिए और शायद इवन दुनिया के लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट होता है, मोमेंट होती है. इररेलेवेंट कि शाह महमूद कुरैशी जाएं, इनार बानी खर जाएं, बिलावल भुट्टो जाएं, जेडे भुट्टो जाएं, इररेलेवेंट जो भी गया है हिंदुस्तान में, जब भी कुछ होता है तो दुनिया देखती है. इसलिए आज का शो इसलिए मैंने आज डेडिकेट किया, दूसरा शो मैंने इसलिए डेडिकेट किया है इस ट्रिप पे. मगर कुछ सवाल हैं मेरे, बहुत सीरियस सवाल हैं बिलावल भुट्टो साहब के लिए. एक तो ये सब क्यों किया गया, व्हाट वाज द पॉइंट ऑफ दिस, ये इतने 20-25 जर्नलिस्ट को आप क्यों लेके गए साथ, ये क्या था, ये व्हाट वाज ऑल ऑफ दिस अबाउट. ये जो वॉर ऑफ वर्ड्स है, ये कौन जीता, अगर तू मैं करने का ही के लिए ही गए थे तो कौन जीता. प्लस क्या पीटीआई का ये मुद्दा, जो पीटीआई के मेरे दोस्त, मेरे फैंस, मेरे देखने वाले, सुनने वाले, मुझे बहुत सारा डेटा आया है पीटीआई की तरफ से, ऑफिशियली भी आया है, अनऑफिशियली भी आया है. उसमें जो जयशंकर साहब हैं वो बिलावल भुट्टो साहब को दहशतगर्दों का रिप्रेजेंटेटिव कह रहे हैं, पाकिस्तान की बेइज्जती कर रहे हैं. क्या ऐसे कुछ फ़ायदा हुआ, ये भी सवाल बनता है. और बाय द वे, जो बहुत बड़ा सवाल बनता है, जो अब मैं ले जाता हूं, ये दीगर सवाल और ये और सवाल अब मैं ले जाता हूं वॉशिंगटन की तरफ, वो ये है कि चाइना जो है, जो पाकिस्तान का इत्तेहादी है, शायद पाकिस्तान का वाहिद इत्तेहादी है, वो सब जो इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का बिग बॉस है, क्योंकि एससीओ चाइना ने बनाई थी, शंघाई कोऑपरेशन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, शंघाई चाइना में है, चाइना का बहुत बड़ा शहर है. तो ये जो सवाल बनता है कि चाइना इस सब में क्या कर रहा है, एससीओ कितना इंपॉर्टेंट है, चाइना का क्या रोल है, इंडिया और चाइना के बीच में पाकिस्तान जो है उसका क्या रोल है, चाइना और पाकिस्तान का इंडिया के ऊपर, जो हमने इस वक्त दोनों साइडों पे सालों से फौज थी, मगर अब तीनों साइडों पे कश्मीर के फौज है. ऊपर चाइना बैठा हुआ है लद्दाख वाली साइड पे, मकबूजा कश्मीर में इंडिया बैठा हुआ है, और इस तरफ आज़ाद कश्मीर में पाकिस्तान बैठा है, जो 50, 60, 70 सालों से जो एक 2-वे कॉन्फ्लिक्ट था, वो क्या अब एक 3-वे कॉन्फ्लिक्ट बन चुका है. ये सब सवाल हैं, ये एससीओ से पिछले 24 से 48 घंटे से निकलते हैं। ये इसलिए इंपॉर्टेंट है क्योंकि मुल्क में जो हो रहा है, जो उन्होंने ड्रामा लगाया हुआ है, सुप्रीम कोर्ट बमुकाबला इमरान खान, बमुकाबला इस्लामाबाद हाई कोर्ट, बमुकाबला हुएवर एल्स, जो बाकी जो छोटे मोटे हैं, जो रोज का ड्रामा है, इसको अगर आप साइड पे रखें, क्योंकि उधर कुछ खास फ्रैंकली हुआ नहीं है। यस, कंग्रेचुलेशंस, अली अमीन गंडापुर जो है वो रिलीज हो गए हैं, ऑल वेरी गुड, ऑल वेरी गुड। मगर लोकल सियासत को अगर अलग रखें, न्यूयॉर्क आए, वॉशिंगटन आए, जूम आउट करें, पैन आउट करें, तो ये बहुत अहम डेवलपमेंट्स हैं, क्योंकि इन सब के पीछे आपकी जो मिलिट्री इस्टेब्लिशमेंट है, वो उसका जो पावर गेम है, पावर डायनामिक है, वो क्या कर रही है, वो क्या सोच रही है, उसकी क्या मैसेजिंग है, वो इंडिया, चाइना, रशिया, अमेरिका, जो सब इसे या सपोर्ट करते हैं या उसे रेजिस्ट करते हैं, इन सब के साथ, क्योंकि ये याद रखिएगा, ये इसलिए फौज हम सब पे हावी हुई है, आज से नहीं 75 सालों से, क्योंकि इंटरनेशनली इसका किरदार बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। और इस पूरे 24-48 घंटों में फौज का क्या एंगल है, ये सवाल जो पूछा है मैंने माइकल कुगलमैन, दोस्त है मेरे, वॉशिंगटन में होते हैं, विल्सन सेंटर के थिंक टैंक है, उसमें साउथ एशियन इनिशिएटिव चलाते हैं, उनसे पूछा है। अगर आपकी अंग्रेजी कमजोर है तो देखिए, कमेंट करिए, मैं आपको कमेंट्स में होपफुली एड करूंगा। अगर आपकी अंग्रेजी बहुत ज्यादा ही मेरी तरह पैदल है तो फिर मैं क्या कह सकता हूं, मेरे पास ट्रांसक्रिप्शन का वक्त नहीं है, मगर इंटरव्यू जरूर देखें। इसका अगर आपको पसंद आया इंटरव्यू, थोड़ा बहुत इंटरेस्ट हो, तो मैं इसका जो ट्रांसलेशन है वो अगले व्लॉग में एज अ फॉलो अप लगा दूंगा। मगर अभी मैं चाह रहा हूं कि आप व्लॉग देखें बाकी, और शेयर करें, लाइक करें, सब्सक्राइब करें, कमेंट करें, सवाल लिखें, अगर कुछ समझ नहीं आ रहा सवाल लिखें, ताकि मैं आपके सवालों का जवाब दे सकूं। और अब एंजॉय करें वॉशिंगटन वाला मेरा इंटरव्यू, उधर चलते हैं। He came, he saw, and he didn't really conquer much, except, of course, the headlines. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari's wrapped up his tour of India, rather Goa, the state of Goa. He was there for the SEO. We've talked about this. But really, to really get inside the weeds, I have with me the one and only, the South Asia wala, who everybody knows of, the man who makes South Asia tick inside the Beltway in Washington, Michael Kugelman of the Wilson Center. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon to you. I'm very well, and hope you are too. Great to be here with you.
Weren't you missing being back in South Asia while this entire drama was unraveling, Michael? Tell me what you make of it.
Well, which drama are we talking about? There's so many dramas one could identify.
Okay, good. The latest, the Goa episodes of this reality TV show called India, Pakistan, Imran versus the world, etc., etc. But this is primarily about the SEO. What do you make of the trip?
Right. Well, I could be facetious and just say that, if you're Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, if you're Waj Khan, if you're Michael Kugelman, who would turn down an opportunity to go to Goa? It's such a nice place. But of course, there's more to it than that. I was not surprised that he went. The context here is that the Pakistani defense minister did not attend the defense minister's SCO meeting, which happened a few days earlier. He participated virtually, but not in person. But my argument has been, and I've written about this, I've tweeted about this, that it really made a lot of sense for Pakistan to go from a foreign policy perspective, in the sense that the SCO is really an important grouping for Islamabad. It's one of the few regional groupings where Pakistan, despite the membership of India, feels welcome. And that's in great part because it is dominated by China, which of course is Pakistan's close ally, and also Russia, which is slowly becoming a friend of Pakistan. So, and the other issue is that half the membership of SCO are Central Asian states. Central Asia has quietly become a very high priority region for Islamabad, in the sense that it wants to strengthen engagement there because of the natural resources and also all kinds of opportunities. And so from that, given all that, I don't think it's a surprise that he went at all, even though certainly it was a very controversial decision to go.
Right. But I mean, to your point about the SEO, I agree. SARC is dead in the water. That other South Asian grouping that's been dead primarily because the India-Pakistan rivalry slowly suffocated it. But the SCO has also been an interesting, from a Pakistani as well as an Indian perspective, it's been an interesting point for both of them, because their friends, the Chinese for the Pakistanis, the Russians for the Indians, have the tendency and the capacity to whisper in each other's ear about the other guy. And so I feel with, for example, the recent Thor, I mean, it's not recent; it's been ongoing for a while. But the recent energy deal, which is significant for Pakistan, the one with Russia, of course, has all happened slowly because the Pakistanis have been engaging the Russians, primarily because of that. And who knows, if they weren't in the SCO, maybe the Indians and the Chinese might still be at loggerheads, though they are eyeball to eyeball. Maybe things would have been worse along that line of actual control in Galwan if it weren't for this grouping. So the grouping is clearly important. But coming back, aren't we back to square one? I mean, from a Pakistani perspective, why did Bilawal go? Because at the end of the day, the Indian foreign minister was pretty frosty. Bilawal was pretty frosty. They both exchanged indirectly, not with each other, hopefully, but indirectly, the different press conferences that they did were quite bitter. The Indian foreign minister said what I expected him to say: Pakistan, terrorism, mainstay, industry of terror, blah, blah, blah. And Bilawal has been called out for that. Bilawal went back to Article 370. India has made a mess of the talks. The ball is in India's court. It's really India's prerogative. Pakistan is ready for peace. Is India ready for peace? The Indian foreign minister came back and said the special status is history. Boom, done, right? So game, set, match in terms of being back to square one. What was the point of this? And this, especially in context of something you and I were talking about yesterday, where Bilawal did hint that he's looking forward to bilateral conversations as well, which we clearly didn't have with the Indians.
Right, exactly. No, I think that it's important not to look at the foreign minister's visit through the prism of India-Pakistan relations, because as you noted, all the strains in the India-Pakistan relationship were on full display while Bhutto Zardari was there, in terms of the speeches from him and Jaishankar. It's similar to any other context where they're both making speeches, like at the UN General Assembly, where you have the Pakistani and Indian leaders criticizing each other, sometimes indirectly, but still quite definitively. So in terms of your question of why did he go, and it's true that nothing really substantive came out of it. There were no new agreements that he signed with any of his interlocutors, but that wasn't expected. Go back to what he himself had said, and indeed we were discussing this yesterday. He looked at this trip as an opportunity to engage bilaterally, and he did indeed meet on the sidelines separately with every member of SCO other than India, though that was not the intention to have a bilat with Jaishankar. And you look at where Pakistan is right now, it's in a very difficult spot with all of its internal turmoil. It needs friends, it needs support, it needs the world it wants to know that some countries in the world are willing to engage with it. So it had this relatively rare opportunity to make one trip and, in the same place at the same meeting, be able to have a meeting with the Russian foreign minister, the Chinese foreign minister, and the foreign ministers of several states in Central Asia that Pakistan sees as important for its interest. Now, critics of the government and critics of the foreign minister would say, well, who cares? He could just have telephone calls. Yeah, that's for sure as well. But I think that for Islamabad, the idea was to send a message that it's committed to the countries in this grouping, it's committed to the SCO, setting aside the India factor, and you can deliver that message much more strongly by actually being there in person, as opposed to having these calls over the phone. Now, all that said, I certainly could acknowledge some of the comments that his critics have made, that he wanted to go because he wanted to sort of build his own image up and, sort of do these media engagements with the Indian press, which will get a lot of attention. Maybe there's something to that as well. But bottom line is, I think this is a case where I actually believe the narrative coming out of the Foreign Office, that this was an opportunity to signal Pakistan's support for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and to engage bilaterally with the members of this group, aside from India.
Right. In all the drama, though, Mike, I think we sort of sometimes forget that the fundamentals are pretty strong considering where Pakistan is and where the Indians are. Pakistan is almost at the verge of default. Pakistan is in the middle of a poly crisis. Pakistan is effectively isolated from much of the rest of the world. Pakistan doesn't make anything of value for planet Earth, really. It's in all sorts of trouble versus the Indians, who are the darling of the world economically, politically. Everybody wants to go to India or wants a piece of India, one way or the other. It's from Apple to Boeing. Everybody wants in. However, um, the fundamentals are in, I would say, reasonable shape. Or maybe you would disagree, and I hope you disagree. Uh, I think that the fundamentals with the 2001, with the 2021 truce, the return of the 2003 ceasefire, for example, are in place. Yeah, there's violations of, but not of a very serious nature along the line of control, as we saw recently in Poonch, where Indian paramilitaries were attacked. Usually, the pushback from Delhi is very quick, very severe about Pakistan. The pushback this time about Islamabad was muted. One could see that. There has been evidence that the back channel, the track 2, which has been ongoing since the previous military chief, General Bajwa, I'm talking about the Pakistani military chief, of course, has been effective. Even though Bajwa is not a very popular figure, this has been an effective olive branch that he did extend with the Indians. It is in play. However, one can't but help to question how long is this sustainable. If you go back just last week to the Pakistan Army chief's speech, the new Army chief's speech, there was a whole section dedicated to India, which he didn't name, but clearly we all know he was talking about India. There's a whole section dedicated to Kashmir, which he effectively said, and every army chief has said this. He said this in a little more detail, that if there is no peace, there can be no peace in the long run in the region if Kashmir isn't resolved. So I'm confused here. There's two sides of me which says, one, the fundamentals are solid bilaterally, but two, they're always under stress. What do you see, especially considering where these two countries stand on their own on the global stage?
Yeah, so I think my sense, looking at the India-Pakistan dynamic, is that each country has a strong incentive in ensuring that tensions don't increase. In other words, neither country has a strong interest in there being an increase in tensions, and that's the reasons why are very clear. One is that Pakistan is dealing with all this internal turmoil; it doesn't want to have to deal with another crisis with India, whereas India is dealing with its northern border, which is increasingly concerning. And I think one could say very confidently that for New Delhi, China is its biggest strategic concern, its biggest security concern. And so it doesn't want to have to deal with trouble on its western border as well. And I think going back to the border, to the LOC truce that you mentioned from 2021, a big reason why both countries were willing to sign on to that was that very idea, to be in a position where they wouldn't have to worry about each other as much. And for me, I think back often to what happened, what was it, a few months ago when that Indian supersonic missile flew over Pakistan. According to New Delhi, it was accidentally launched. And the way Pakistan responded, it was such a muted or relatively muted response, a statement of condemnation. And that was it. My sense is if that had happened at another time, we could have had another war, conceivably. So that to me suggested on the Pakistani side, even if there's a provocation, or something that could be perceived as a provocation, Pakistan wouldn't want to go there. It wanted to avoid escalation. Now, all that said, I agree with you that this is a relationship that's on tenterhooks all the time. It wouldn't take much. If there's some sort of provocation or trigger, even one thing like that could lead to a serious escalation. I think we could expect in the coming months to hear a lot of nasty rhetoric from the Indian government about Pakistan as it gets into its own election campaign season. India, of course, has an election in about a year from now. So, we could expect that. But generally speaking, the rhetoric doesn't bother me. I mean, the things that Bilawal Bhutto Zardari said about Modi doesn't really bother me in the sense that this is typical for the relationship. I mean, the mudslinging is very common. The army chief, he said some pretty harsh things about India, but it seems that any time a new Pakistan army chief takes over, it's sort of obligatory for them
Oh
to do
yeah.
that type of thing.
Oh yeah.
So it's I agree that the relationship is in a point of relative stability right now, but it wouldn't take much. It would only take a potential trigger or provocation, including God forbid a terrorist attack in India that India believes to have been committed by terrorists based in Pakistan. So it's always in that very uneasy position, so to speak.
Okay, so then that takes me naturally to your point about the other threat that, from India's perspective, the Chinese. Now, the army chief, the Pakistan army chief, was in China. Again, this is all last week. Last week was pretty big in this trilateral situation that we see here. Then the Pakistanis are hosting the Chinese today and tomorrow. The Chinese foreign minister is in Pakistan. Uh, uh, and Pakistan is doing its thing because it's serving as an intermediary, hosting the Afghan Taliban, who have a travel ban. Nobody talks to the Afghan Taliban. Most people don't want to talk to the Afghan Taliban. But here is Pakistan doing what it's done now for years with that regime, which is to open it up or try to open it up and normalize it vis-a-vis the rest of the world. The Chinese did engage with the Pakistanis, with the Afghans earlier last year. We saw that in the aftermath of the US pullout. But it's sort of they seem to be going along with their more important friends in the region, who are the Pakistanis. That's one. It's one aspect. How do you see that? But before we jump to that, I was distracted by my own digression there. Uh, I'd like to talk about what you have just referred to first, which is this three front, or rather two front war with this three-way war which India potentially faces, with the Pakistanis on one side of that world's highest battlefield, the Chinese on the other side. There are reports now emerging, and they're more and more believable, that the Pakistani military is now embedded with the Chinese military on certain formations along the line of control. These are, of course, military advisors. These aren't entire like units which are in battle-worthy shape, but these are important officers. The Pakistanis have long served inside Chinese military headquarters as well as advisors. This is becoming more and more of a two-front war possibility if we really stretch it out and war game it. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, certainly the close relationship between Pakistan and China is something that has long been of great concern to New Delhi, and particularly given recent dynamics as the U.S.-India relationship has grown. I think that both Pakistan and China have been compelled to double down and strengthen their own relationship even more. In terms of this two-front war idea, yes, I mean, this is something that in strategic thinkers in India have been trying to game out all the possibilities that can come from that, so that they could plan things out and deter that possibility. But going back to what I said before, yes, India does worry about certain types of security risks emanating from Pakistan, and especially terrorism for sure. But I think that the China challenge looms over everything else, and specifically the border issue. I mean, it's quite clear to all that India does not have the capacity to deter China. Certainly, when China stages these provocations on the line of actual control, India has been able to push back. And certainly, as U.S. intelligence support to India ramps up in the coming months, I think that India's capacity to anticipate or perhaps prevent or sort of send back these Chinese incursions when they come, that capacity will improve. But for now, India just doesn't have that capacity to deter China. And I think it's not only the border, but if you look at the waters, the Western Indian Ocean region, we know that China's only known overseas military base is off Djibouti in the western fringe of the Indian Ocean region, not too far from India, and also China's growing naval presence in the Western Indian Ocean region. This is India believes this is a reality. So Pakistan doesn't pose those types of threats. Now, that said, I oftentimes remember something that an Indian analyst told me during one of my trips to India many years ago, and they said, I asked him what India thought about the perceived threat from Pakistan. He said, "Well, we try not to worry about Pakistan, but we just hope that if and when it falls, it doesn't take us with it." And
Huh.
I think, given developments of recent months, recent weeks in Pakistan, with all this talk about internal turmoil, lack of cohesiveness within the security institutions, I think now that quotation or that observation may be particularly apt. So that's the best way I can offer my assessment, and articulating what I feel to be India's position. Focus laser-like on on China, but not wanting to be complacent about Pakistan for sure.
Yeah, build up on that a little, Michael, because I'm hearing that too. In fact, over the years, as Pakistan has declined and India has grown rapidly, but one rapid this way, one rapid this way, up and down trajectories there. The Pakistanis have effectively self-immolated in so many ways. But the Indians, besides now being the world's fifth largest economy, $3.5 trillion, again, like I said earlier, the darling of the world versus this old man of South Asia. Completely different trajectories there. There's been a sense amongst the IC, the analyst community, that some Indians hold the Pakistanis in disdain, as if they're not important enough to really keep an eye on. The real strategic rival clearly is China. But what happens if Pakistan does go down tomorrow? How are your friends in the analytical community there? What are some of the worst case scenarios India imagines that Pakistan could end up in, which will perhaps take India along with it as it goes down? What's the worst case scenario here?
You're right, and I don't want to overstate this idea of state collapse and civil war or anything like
Sure,
that in Pakistan. I don't think we're anywhere near that point.
sure, sure.
But indeed, if we want to game out worst case scenarios, I think that if you do have political violence that's sustained, and if the government and the army are completely in over their heads, I think that's where the terrorist threat can become much more. The TTP would I'm sure be happy to take advantage of chaos and so on, and try to stage more attacks, which could well lead to a situation where you have militants who are somehow able to take advantage of opportunities to cross the border and carry out attacks in India. Um, that's something that can't be ruled out. And I think there's so many indications that this notion of cross-border infiltration of militants from Pakistan into to Indian-administered Kashmir has not been happening as much in recent years as it had earlier on. But if the country of Pakistan is falling apart, then to the extent that the establishment still has control over some of these militants, if that control is not there, again, these are really worst case scenarios here. But these are certainly things that India would worry about.
Sure.
Would worry about a lot. So, yeah, I think it's something that's worth considering. And for those in the U.S. intelligence community and others that always like to be ahead of the curve, right? And sort of thinking ahead about what could happen in the future that would be like a worst case scenario. We saw that didn't work in an Afghanistan context, right?
Mm.
The U.S. didn't anticipate that the Taliban would take over the country before the withdrawal was complete. But I'm sure that in India, there's a lot of thinking going on now about how to anticipate or how to respond to the possibility of sustained social violence, instability in Pakistan. But again, I don't want to overstate that scenario right now. We're nowhere near that point.
All right, and I know, Mike. I know you got to run, but I need you to answer that place you just brought us to naturally. Anyways, Afghanistan. The Afghans are in Pakistan. It's the only country which can officially host them, according to the UN. This had to go to the UN for the Chinese and the Pakistanis to meet the Afghans in Islamabad. The Security Council had to weigh in on it. What do you think now that the statements indicate that CPAC is sort of back online? We heard that from China last week. The 10th anniversary of CPAC is there. The hints are that the Chinese are interested in getting that ball rolling again, which is sort of dead in the water. There's talks about including the Afghans in the CPAC corridor. What do you make of all this, given what just happened under the auspices of the SCO. Is China stepping in as the next major benefactor in this region? With for the Pakistanis, of course, it's always been there, but also for the Afghans. Is that next?
Well, I don't know. I'd say there's been some loss in momentum with CPAC, and despite all these recent pronouncements, that's still the case. I mean, my understanding is that Beijing remains very concerned about security risks to its assets and its nationals in Pakistan. The fact that there's been a number of cases over the last few years, including in recent months, where Chinese assets and nationals have been targeted in Pakistan, and the perception in Beijing is that Pakistan has not acted to ensure more security for China. So that's going to remain a concern. I think that'll make Beijing cautious, and not to mention, I can't imagine, so long as Pakistan's economic situation is what it is, that Beijing would be in a hurry to start sending more investments in there. I just can't imagine that.
Then why are they talking to the Afghans? Why are the Chinese in Islamabad today under the cover of CPEC talks, one of many subjects? What are they talking about then today? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that's important for public messaging. This idea that CPEC is alive and well, it's not going to be deterred or undermined by these various challenges. And also, I think that China is seriously trying to look into the possibilities of investing more in Afghanistan, not necessarily under a CPEC rubric, but as you know, not too long ago, a Chinese company signed an oil exploration and energy exploration deal with the Taliban. But even that, China, it's very interesting in that China is willing to take on a lot of risk in terms of the geographies of its investments. It's willing to invest in some pretty volatile places, but it's been very cautious in Afghanistan over the course of the war, and even over the last year plus. It really has been quite cautious, and I think China is very concerned about the Taliban not dealing with the terrorist threats that worry China the most, and that ranges from Islamic State Khorasan to ETIM, this relatively small group of Uyghur militants. And so I think Beijing will be cautious in that regard. But to your question, I think it's important for both China and Pakistan to sort of telegraph this idea of, yes, CPEC is alive and well. Nothing, just because obviously it's the biggest rivals of these groups, India, for example, that tend to, put this emphasis on how it's a failed enterprise and so on and so forth. But final point, going back to the contrast you were drawing between India and Pakistan. India is doing so well, Pakistan is not. What better indication of that contrast than looking at the guests that the two countries have been welcoming in recent months, right? India is hosting the G20. It's hosting top leaders from the US and the most powerful economies in the world. It's hosting the Chinese and so on. Who is Pakistan hosting? The Taliban foreign minister. So that may be unfair to draw it that way, but still, it's a sign of how things are right now.
Michael Kugelman, everybody's favorite South Asia wala from inside the Beltway. Mike, I hope to see you soon in Washington, my friend.
Absolutely. I hope so. Thanks for having me. This was great as always.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.